So the big question is this. We know spontaneous remissions and so-called miracle cures exist. We also know they aren't so spontaneous after all. I'm living proof of this, having cured my quote-unquote incurable illness. There's something to how this happens. So how do we, as humans with chronic symptoms, tap into this so-called miraculous healing capacity? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Dr. Erin Hayford, and welcome to the Sacred Illness Podcast. Before we begin today's episode, just my standard medical disclaimer. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The content should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional regarding any medical concerns. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Sacred Illness Podcast. I'm Dr. Erin. I am flying solo today, and I am talking about a topic that is really aligned with the heart and soul of what this podcast is all about, which is illness as a sacred invitation to reconnect with ourselves, to reconnect with who we are and what we are when we first came into this world before childhood programming, trauma, stress, etc. got in the way of that person. And I have recently come across this quote by Gabor Mate that says, essentially, when forced to choose between attachment and authenticity, we will choose attachment every time. I feel like this is really, again, the heart and soul of what this work is all about, because when we are born, we have this nature that we come into the world having. Anyone who's had kids or has been around little kids can see that, right? There's just certain qualities and ways in which little children show up in the world that have absolutely nothing to do with anyone around them. It's just who they are. So we arrive into this world with a certain nature. And as we move through our childhood, as we are nurtured by those around us, by culture, by caregivers, by eventually friends and other relationships, those relationships begin to impact us and shape us and change us. Sometimes for the better, sometimes they bring out parts of us that are authentic and aligned in a more maybe crystal clear way, or maybe just in a way that they wouldn't have been expressed before. But a lot of times these relationships cause us to become misaligned with who we are. It causes us to suppress aspects of ourselves or to hide them away or to maybe even not know them in the first place. And this is the result of us choosing attachment over authenticity. For example, when we are, let's say, a little child and we are going through the throes of what we call the terrible twos or the three-nager stage of being 2 or 3 years old, and we have a lot of anger, and we are expressing that anger in this unadulterated, unfiltered, unbridled way, because that's the reality of being a child. We do not have the brain development yet to be more rational, to rein in that anger, to express it in a healthy manner, to express our needs, to even have control over it. We have no impulse control. It's very primal anger at that age. And that primal anger wants to hurt stuff. It wants to hit, it wants to scream, it wants to kick, it wants to bite and scratch. Some kids don't express it as intensely as others, but some kids have this just pure expression of anger that comes out at this age. And so let's say that you have parents, let's say this is you, and you're having this anger expression, and you have parents who don't know how to be with anger. And let's be honest, that's a lot of us, especially older generations before trauma, nervous system stuff, emotional intelligence was even a thing, right? All of these things are very much products of our modern day psychological understanding and research and all of the things. So a lot of this stuff just didn't exist when our parents were growing up and when they were parenting us. And again, let's just say you are this child expressing this anger and you have parents who don't know how to be with it, and they see it as this terrible thing, because that is going to feel really triggering to an adult nervous system when they see their child acting out in that anger. There's also a response that can happen that is like, oh my gosh, if I don't rein this in, my kid's going to be violent. They're going to be a really violent child. They're going to cause a lot of harm. I have to stop this anger. And so we see this, again, animalistic expression of anger coming out of our children, and we try to stop it. We say, don't do that. You're going to go to your room. If you do that again, I'm going to give you this consequence. Maybe even there's spanking or higher levels of abuse that can happen. If that's what's happening, what are we learning? We're learning if I express this anger in this way, it's going to harm my attachment to my caregiver. They get mad at me, they punish me, there's consequences. A lot of times parents will separate themselves from their child, right? If their child is being angry and violent, they'll say, you go to your room, time out, right? There's this separation that's happening. That's incredibly distressing for a nervous system. Our attachment to our caregivers is necessary for survival, especially when we're young. We need them to survive, quite literally. We need them to get food. We can't go to the grocery store. We can't cook, right? We need them to provide shelter. We need them to provide warmth, clothing, water. We need them to pour water into a cup for us, right? We cannot do these things ourselves, and they are crucial for our survival. And so we need them. For better or for worse, we need them. And so anything that we see, let's say I express anger and my parents go away from me, that is not good to my nervous system. That's not good for my survival. And so my subconscious mind, my limbic system, and these subconscious structures of my nervous system remember this. It's like they take a picture and they put it in that little computer, and it's saying that does not lead to good things that are necessary for survival, so just don't do it again. And so then what's the result of that? I feel anger in my body and I say, no, I'm not going to express that anger. I'm going to hold it in. I'm going to push it somewhere down deep into my system, and I'm going to pretend everything's fine. Or I'm just going to suck it up and deal with whatever's making me angry, right? I'm just going to numb myself to this experience. Whenever we're encountering something that makes us angry, that could be anything, right? And it could be at any age throughout our childhood. So let's say we have that programming that happens that's saying anger is bad, don't be angry. We suppress it, we don't express our anger. Then throughout our childhood into tween years, teenage years, and beyond into adulthood, that program is going to be there. It's programmed into our subconscious mind, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, what that means. But that program is there, and that it's like a computer. Like it's going to run, this system is going to run and run until or unless we do something about it. So that means that anytime we're encountering something that makes us angry, it's going to elicit that response that says, that's not safe. Don't feel that way. Don't express that anger. Don't feel it. Don't say it. We're going to have that same response, right? And so every time we feel that anger, two things are happening. We're having that response, we're suppressing it in the body, and we're having a stress response because our nervous system is saying, oh my gosh, that's the thing that threatens your safety. That's the thing that threatens your attachment to your people, to your caregivers, to your survival. This is a threat, right? To distill it down, our nervous system is constantly weighing out, is this a threat or is this safe? If it's safe, great, we love it. It's good. No reaction. If it's a threat, then our nervous system is going to remember it. It's going to mark it. It's going to remember what that threat is. And whenever we encounter that threat, from now on, anything that is exactly that thing or reminiscent of that thing, then it has an immediate response to it, which is to shift us into fight or flight. And that's saying we're either going to fight this threat or we're going to get away from this threat. And if we can't do either one of those things, then we're going to freeze, where we're just physiologically shutting down. So it's really in our survival's best interest for our nervous system to remember these threats. The thing about programming, I said earlier something about the limbic system. So these are subconscious structures in our mind. It's an automatic system. It's actually called the autonomic nervous system. So I've always just remembered that because it sounds like the word automatic. Our autonomic nervous system is the branch of our nervous system that does things like helps us breathe, keeps our heart beating, helps food move through our guts, all the things we don't have to think about. This is what the autonomic nervous system does for us. And thank God, because there's a lot of things that we would have to think and consciously, like that would be our whole life, right? Would be to just keep our body going. So the autonomic nervous system is doing all of those things in the background to keep our body going. It is also what is remembering the things that are threatening to our survival and responding automatically to them to help, again, aid in our survival. So if you think about the autonomic nervous system, its entire job is keeping us alive, keeping our heart going, keeping food moving through, distributing nutrients throughout our system, keeping our blood moving, keeping oxygen coming into our tissues. And it's also in charge of our stress response, because that is a part of the survival mechanism. To help our body shift physiologically into a state of survival is part of that automatic response of what do I need to do to keep you alive? On a basic level, I need to keep your organs functioning. On this next level, I need to help your body shift to survive threats to your survival. And so it is that part of the mind that gets programmed with things that are threats to our survival. And when we get triggered, it is an immediate response. We don't have to think about it, right? We've all experienced that. We get triggered. It's this immediate anger, big energy in the body. Heart is racing, pupils dilating, muscles tightening, breathing is quickening, right? That's that adrenaline response. And then eventually cortisol kicks in too. Our body is just ready to go. And we didn't have to do anything except to experience that trigger. And here we are. So again, that is evolutionarily in our best favor. That is happening because we don't want to have to see a bear and then be like, I think I should probably feel stressed about this. Okay, body, kick into gear. We want to see the thing and immediately be ready to go. From a physiological perspective or from a functional perspective, this is obviously a very good thing. We want our body to program and to remember this was bad, this was good, this was bad, this was good, and be ready to respond to the things that were bad so that we can respond and react instantaneously. The problem is trauma. Trauma is this thing that shifts us into fight, flight, freeze and never shifts back out. Not having our needs met by our caregivers is traumatic. That is a traumatizing event to feel like our survival and our safety is threatened by our caregivers. I see this a lot with people who are like, my parents were wonderful. They were amazing parents. I had a great childhood. I don't know why I have this chronic illness because nothing seems to add up in terms of the trauma response, right? It doesn't have to be this capital T trauma. It can be these micro moments of neglect, of not meeting needs, of not allowing us to show up authentically that add up into this experience of having a dysregulated nervous system. So let's say we couldn't express our anger. Maybe we couldn't express our grief. Maybe certain ideas we had about the world were dismissed or not allowed. This can happen in families where there's really fundamental or dogmatic beliefs that force a child to show up and feel and be a certain way. The more we box children in to having to show up a certain way in the world, the more distressing that is because it's not allowing for this free-flowing, authentic self to come forward. I can't overemphasize how these moments, these micro moments of having to choose between attachment and authenticity really is what is programming our system to get further and further away from who we are. And this is a problem because turns out that quote of wherever you go, there you are is a very true quote. Wherever we go, we're going to have our authentic self somewhere inside of us. And every single time we are showing up in a way that is misaligned with that authentic self, we're sending that message to ourselves. We're not safe. It's not safe to be you. It's not safe to express this part of you. And it's just reinforcing this message of lack of safety, which is saying to the nervous system, there's a threat present, and that is shifting physiology completely into a state of fight, flight, freeze. And why that matters is because fight, flight, freeze is not a state in which healing can occur. I feel like that's a sentence I say every day of my life, but it cannot be overemphasized. When I see people going on these healing journeys and they're doing all these labs and they're doing all these supplements and medications or having surgery, restrictive diets, sometimes those things are incredibly helpful and validating and necessary and do point to things that need to be supported or tweaked because maybe there's deficiencies or something that need to be addressed. However, if we're not considering the fact that the nervous system is also at play here, none of the results of treating those labs is going to result in sustainable long-term healing. If the nervous system is chronically activated because of this misalignment between ourselves trying to come forward, trying to express, if that's chronically happening in the background, then the nervous system's chronically in a state of fight, flight, freeze, physiologically impossible to heal in that state. That is not a state meant for healing. That's a state meant for survival. Survival and healing are not compatible goals of the body. As far as the body's concerned, survival is the number one function. And if that means getting away from the threat, that takes priority. It's like triage, right? The body is triaging what is most important for survival right now. Okay, apparently by the way the body is reacting right now, there's a threat present. And so we need to fight it, we need to get away from it, or we need to freeze. That's the priority. But when we're constantly getting triggered, when we're constantly having that subconscious reaction to threats because of the way that it's been programmed from childhood events, then we never get out of it. It's always going to feel unsafe until or unless we go in and change it. This is where I really want to emphasize how we have the power. We have the capacity to go in and reprogram these pathways. We can go in and identify where did we disconnect from our authentic selves? What program did we pick up from these circumstances of our childhoods that took us away from who we are? Where did we get boxed in to show up in a certain way that it was just not us? And how are we showing up every single day that's creating this constant message of I'm not safe, which is then shifting my state into that triage mode of, okay, top priority is to fight the threat. And then once the threat's gone, we can go back to the other priorities, which is digesting your food and lowering your blood pressure and releasing the tension in your muscles. All of the major hallmarks and characteristics of chronic illness can be traced back to how the body shifts when it's in fight, flight, freeze. And I really don't understand why this isn't talked about more often. Inflammation is a response of chronic cortisol secretion, cortisol being a stress hormone, because when cortisol comes in and floods our system to get our body to shift physiologically into a state of fight or flight, it plugs into these receptors called glucocorticoid receptors, and the purpose of those receptors is to modulate our stress response. So when cortisol binds to it, it basically makes those receptors irrelevant. They can't function as well. And so then inflammation is running rampant because there's nothing to modulate it. Those receptors are offline because of cortisol. And so if cortisol is chronically flooding our system, shifting us into this state of fight, flight, freeze, we're going to have this chronic suppression of those receptors. We're going to therefore have chronic inflammation. And where does that lead? Autoimmune disease, for one, asthma, for two, lots of other conditions. Think about any chronic illness. Usually there's some form of inflammation present. Almost every single chronic illness we see on the market today, so to speak, has roots in what the body is doing when it shifts into fight, flight, freeze. And we have the capacity to go in, to identify what these programs are, and to rewire our reality. We have the capacity to rewire our minds in order to overwrite or to get rid of these old programs, update the software, so to speak, of our minds, and to create a story that's more in alignment with our current reality, our current circumstances, and that's in alignment with our authentic selves. How we do this is not a one and done process. And I think this is another mindset shift that really has to happen in medicine, where we're constantly searching for that silver bullet. And I just get so frustrated when I see folks spending like thousands of dollars on these newfangled therapies and these really, there's so much out there now, right? The fact that we are spending so much money on these therapies obviously speaks to the desperation that a lot of us have with chronic illnesses, the desperation and the hope that this is the thing that's going to work. We have in our minds this attachment to the more it costs, the better it is. And I'm here to burst that bubble because that's just not true. I think we need to rewrite that story in our minds that the more we spend does not necessarily increase our odds of recovery. I think oftentimes the stuff that I talk about here is overlooked because it's almost so simple. It's like, that's just not it. It can't be that simple. It's also it's not simple what I'm teaching. It's simple in theory. It's not hard in practice, but it takes time, right? It takes time to practice and to implement the things that I teach. And I think, again, we want two things. We want it to be a silver bullet that just takes care of the problem. So we see these fancy therapies that are like one and done or do 5 and you're done kind of thing. We want it to do it for us. We want these external things where the external thing comes in, fixes the problem, and then I'm done. And we think the more expensive, the better. So I feel like those are some big mindset shifts that need to start happening, where there is no silver bullet, right? There's no thing external to you that is going to come in and heal your whole body, because you have an innate healing capacity in your own body that is controlled by the nervous system. Only you can have the relationship with your nervous system that is capable of shifting it out of the chronic state of fight, flight, freeze. Only you have that capacity. You are ultimately the one who has to go in and work with your own nervous system to shift it out of fight, flight, freeze. I can't give you a supplement that does that for you. I can't give you a supplement that goes in and rewrites your neural pathways for you, right? This is you doing the work. You have to do the work. And I know that's not sexy. I know that's not exciting. But I also know that's why you haven't seen results that you want to see, because this has not been done yet. And any healing process that does not involve nervous system work in general, and then doesn't include you rewriting neural pathways, getting into that subconscious mind and working at that level, is not going to give you the results that you want. These other therapies, a lot of them are really great, right? And really do help and really are necessary. And they're like a piece of the pie. They're part of this picture, but they're not the whole picture. And neither is this nervous system stuff. If you are chronically dysregulated, but you're also super iron deficient, this is not going to replace your iron deficiency. It's going to work with the cause of the iron deficiency. I think the way to think about the external treatments is that they can either palliate and make things less uncomfortable while you work on that root cause stuff, or they really are treating what is deficient in your system that the mind-body stuff caused, and can help just expedite your healing process by getting you there faster. Let's say there's a mind-body reason that you're having heavy periods, for example, and that's leading to iron deficiency. If you're working on that mind-body connection to the heavy periods, that will eventually resolve. Eventually your iron stores will come back up, but an iron supplement is going to get you there faster. And same with eating certain foods that feel nourishing for your body, drinking enough water. Mind-body medicine is not going to hydrate you. It's not H2O, right? This is different. Getting enough sleep. Mind-body work is probably going to help you sleep better. It might work with the reasons why you have insomnia. But if you don't have insomnia, if that's not one of your problems and you're chronically tired, there's these foundational elements to health and healing that we need to have in place. Mind-body work comes and does this crucial additional foundational piece of making sure your system is actually in a physiological state where healing can occur. And then these external treatments can come in, and it's almost like they're doing the cleanup job. They're helping to calm the tissue down. They're helping to reset stuff or replace stuff or whatever. They're coming and cleaning up the mess that the dysregulated nervous system caused. Not by any fault of its own, it's a natural response to stress. And these things happen when we are chronically shifted into a state of fight, flight, freeze, but still they need some attention. So hopefully that's a helpful mindset shift for you to think about the role of external therapies, that you literally are the only person who can go in and work with your own nervous system to rewrite, to access and then rewrite those stories that are programmed in your mind. And we know that it takes 30 to 90 days to rewrite a neural pathway. So that means you have to be going in, sitting with those programs, accessing those programs, sitting with them and rewriting them fairly consistently. I say daily, which I know we have all the reasons in the world why we can't do this. And I get it. I'm busy. I have 2 kids. I'm a business owner. I have a lot on my plate. And if I'm not regulated, it all goes to shit. Like, I'm going to be sick. I'm going to feel terrible. Our health, our well-being, our nervous system, our mind and body are the most precious things we have. I want to offer you this daily practice that we've created. It's a 10-minute a day commitment. 10 minutes. That's it. 10 minutes a day is, I always say to people, like, how long are you on your phone every day? Look at your little stats on your phone. You'll be shocked and appalled, right? You can do this for 10 minutes. You can do it right on your phone. You can listen to this meditation for 10 minutes and then you can get back to scrolling. Easy peasy, right? When we do this work. So the first step is, as we're doing this neural rewriting, we start to sit with this vision of who are we at our core? Who is our authentic self? And there's a whole process I walk you through for how to identify who this person is. Who am I really? How do I really want to show up? What do I really want out of my life? We start to sit with that vision, and as we sit with it, we start to feel all of these things coming forward, these limiting beliefs, these fears, these doubts, these stories. Those are the programs that need to be rewritten. Those are the programs that are in your subconscious mind saying, red flag, unsafe, turn around, go back, don't do it. Those are the programs. And then once you start to identify and see those programs coming forward, then we have a whole process for rewriting them. So it's this 2-step process where it's, number 1, sit with the vision, see what comes forward, identify those as the programs that are keeping you small, stuck, and sick. Take those programs and reprogram them through this other process we have on our community, which I'll talk about in a second. And then you're off to the races because it's that simple. And it takes time, it takes dedication, it takes a daily commitment. But generally speaking, it's going to take consistency to rewrite those pathways, because essentially what we're doing is we're teaching the nervous system to disband the current default pathway